Othello, the titular character of William Shakespeare's Othello, stands as one of the most complex and tragic figures in Shakespearean drama. A respected general, a cultural outsider, a loving husband, and ultimately a victim of manipulation and internal conflict, Othello's character embodies the intersection of personal vulnerability and societal prejudice. His journey from heroic leader to destructive murderer is not simply the result of Iago's deceit but also the culmination of his insecurities and the pressures placed upon him by a world that views him as both indispensable and alien. Role in the narrative. At the beginning of the play, Othello is a figure of immense respect. As a general of the Venetian army, he is admired for his military skill and leadership. His reputation is so strong that the Venetian Senate depends on him to defend the state against the Turkish threat. Despite his foreignness, he is a Moor from North Africa. Othello has earned a place at the center of Venetian political and military life. This position, however, is precarious. Othello's authority and dignity exist in tension with his status as an outsider. His elopement with Desdemona disrupts social expectations, and characters like Brabantio immediately turn to racist explanations, suggesting he must have used sorcery or manipulation to win Desdemona's love. The play thus establishes Othello as someone who must constantly defend not only his actions but his very legitimacy in Venetian society. Othello is the tragic hero whose downfall drives the play. Shakespeare structures the story so that Othello's emotional trajectory guides the audience. We witness his initial composure, his growing suspicion, his torment under Iago's manipulation, and finally his catastrophic loss of self-control. Othello's transformation from noble general to jealous murderer is the engine of the plot. Without his trust in Iago, the tragedy would not unfold. Othello's willingness to believe Iago over Desdemona reflects the vulnerability that lies beneath his public strength, an insecurity that Iago expertly exploits. By Act V, when Othello realizes his error, the tragedy becomes complete. He has destroyed the person he loves most and recognizes that he has been transformed into something he despises. Symbolic significance. Othello symbolizes both the Renaissance fascination with and fear of the exotic other. He represents a man who has risen to prominence despite racial barriers, yet he is continually reminded of his difference. The language used to describe him, the Moor, thick lips, an old black ram, reveals the prejudices embedded in Venetian society. Othello's race functions as a fault line that Iago manipulates. Iago understands that Othello's outsider status makes him sensitive to perceptions of loyalty, purity, and reputation. By suggesting that Desdemona might prefer someone more similar to herself, Iago plants doubt in Othello's mind about his own worthiness. Thus, Othello's racial identity becomes a symbolic anchor for his psychological downfall, representing how societal prejudices infiltrate the self. Othello begins the play as a disciplined soldier who values order, rationality, and honor. His speech in the early acts is measured and poetic, reflecting his intellectual and emotional control. As Iago manipulates him, his language deteriorates into fragmented, violent expressions, signaling his descent into chaos. Othello's breakdown becomes a representation of how quickly civilization can erode when trust collapses. Shakespeare uses Othello to explore the fragility of human stability. Even the strongest individual can be undone by internal conflict and external manipulation. Othello's defining quality is his profound capacity for trust. He trusts Desdemona completely at the beginning of the play, but he trusts Iago more. This misplaced trust is not a sign of weakness but rather a reflection of Othello's openness and honesty. Iago's deception is effective precisely because Othello assumes that others possess his same integrity. Yet this trust also reveals vulnerability. Othello believes in absolute loyalty, and when he suspects that loyalty has failed, his identity begins to collapse. His love for Desdemona is deep but also idealized. He sees her almost as a symbol of purity. The thought of her betrayal destroys not just his relationship with her but his sense of self. Broader implications. Othello's story exposes the destructive consequences of social prejudice. His downfall reflects how a society that superficially praises him can simultaneously isolate him. Shakespeare highlights the hypocrisy of a culture that values Othello's military use but refuses to accept him as a social equal. The tragedy thus becomes a critique of racism. Othello's end is shaped not only by Iago's schemes but by a societal framework that makes those schemes possible. Othello idealizes love, honor, and reputation. His moral worldview allows for no gray area. Desdemona is either perfectly faithful or utterly corrupt. This rigid idealization intensifies his jealousy and the extremity of his final actions. Shakespeare uses Othello to demonstrate the dangers of perceiving human relationships in absolute terms. Ultimately, Othello's character represents the vulnerability inherent in being human. His strengths, leadership, love, trust, and honor are twisted into weaknesses under the pressure of manipulation and insecurity. The broader implication is that even noble qualities can lead to disaster when distorted by deceit and fear. Conclusion. Othello is a tragic hero whose complexity lies in the interplay between his profound strengths and profound vulnerabilities. As a respected general, a racial outsider, a devoted husband, and a deeply emotional individual, he becomes the site where personal virtue and societal prejudice collide. His downfall reveals not only the destructive power of jealousy but also the psychological and social forces that shape human behavior. Through Othello, Shakespeare invites the audience to reflect on themes of identity, trust, and the fragile boundary between reason and passion. Othello remains one of Shakespeare's most compelling characters precisely because his tragedy is both deeply personal and universally resonant.